This is the story of a billionaire whose humble appearance masked his extraordinary influence, and a flight attendant whose snap judgment set off a chain of events she could never have anticipated. What began as a moment of prejudice turned into a lesson in redemption, a journey of self-discovery and a transformation that would shake an entire airline to its core. Bookmark. Before we dive into this gripping story of forgiveness, change, and second chances, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss out on more inspiring tales like this. On a sunny afternoon, Alex Carter, a man in his early 60s, boarded the first-class cabin of a bustling airline. His silver-streaked hair, neatly combed back, paired with his modest gray suit, gave him the appearance of an average gentleman rather than one of the country's most influential billionaires. Alex carried a leather briefcase, worn from years of use, in one hand and walked with an unhurried stride, exuding calm and approachability. Alex had always preferred simplicity. Despite his immense wealth, he valued the quiet satisfaction of staying under the radar. To him, wealth was not about flashy appearances or luxurious indulgences, but about the opportunities it provided to uplift others. This flight was supposed to be a peaceful break after a long day of board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. He had just finalized the acquisition of a major airline, a deal he hoped would bring positive changes to the industry. Alex found his seat in the plush first-class cabin, placed his briefcase carefully in the overhead compartment, and settled in with a soft sigh. He opened a book from his carry-on bag, planning to enjoy a few uninterrupted hours of reading above the clouds. The hum of passengers filling the cabin created a comforting background noise, and for a brief moment, Alex felt the day's stress begin to fade away. But tranquility didn't last long. As Alex leaned back into his seat, Lana Blake, a flight attendant in her late 30s, approached. Her uniform was immaculate, her blonde hair styled in a perfect bun, and her expression carried an air of authority. From the moment she laid eyes on Alex, her demeanor shifted. Instead of the warm professionalism expected in first class, her gaze grew cold, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Excuse me, sir," Lana said sharply, scanning Alex with a scrutinizing look. "I believe you may be in the wrong cabin. The economy section is further back." Alex raised his head, meeting her gaze with calm curiosity. "No, I'm in the right seat," he said, his voice soft but firm. Lana's eyebrows arched in disbelief. She crossed her arms and surveyed the cabin, noting the other passengers, some of whom had turned to observe the interaction. "May I see your ticket?" she asked, her tone thick with skepticism. Alex hesitated briefly, sensing the judgment behind her words. This was not his first time experiencing such treatment. Over the years, subtle and overt forms of bias had peppered his journey, even as he rose to prominence. He had grown accustomed to it, though it still stung. "Of course," Alex replied calmly. He reached into his pocket and handed over his ticket, his hand steady despite the quiet humiliation of the moment. Lana took the ticket with a briskness that bordered on rudeness, holding it up to the light as though it were counterfeit. The air grew heavy as other passengers watched the exchange, their conversations dwindling into an uneasy silence. "Is there a problem?" Alex asked gently after a few moments, his composure unwavering despite the scrutiny. Lana's eyes flicked from the ticket to Alex's face. "This ticket seems unusual," she muttered, her voice laced with suspicion. "I'll need to verify it with the gate agent." Without another word, she spun on her heel and strode away, leaving Alex seated in the awkward stillness that followed. The other passengers exchanged uncertain glances, their discomfort evident. Alex closed his eyes, inhaling deeply to quell the frustration bubbling within. He had dealt with prejudice throughout his life, and while it never became easier, he had learned that anger seldom yielded meaningful outcomes. For now, he would wait. When Lana returned, her face was flushed with a mix of embarrassment and indignation. "Your ticket checks out," she said curtly, thrusting it back into his hand. "But surely you meant to book a seat in the economy?" Alex's patience, though considerable, began to wear thin. He looked her in the eye, his expression firm yet composed. "There is no mistake, ma'am," he said. "This is my seat." Lana's face reddened further. "I must insist that you lower your voice," she snapped, despite the fact that Alex hadn't raised it. You're disturbing the other passengers." Before Alex could respond, Lana's hand moved unexpectedly, striking him across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the cabin, freezing everyone in their seats. Alex's head jerked slightly from the impact, and his cheek burned where her palm had landed. A collective gasp swept through the passengers. Some reached for their phones to capture the incident, while others looked on in stunned silence. Lana stood motionless, her hand still mid-air, as if realizing too late what she had done. Alex's composure wavered for the first time as he raised a hand to his cheek. His eyes filled with equal parts hurt and disbelief. The cabin remained deathly quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. "Why did you slap me?" Alex asked finally, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried a power that silenced even Lana's hurried attempts at explanation. For a brief second, Lana faltered, but she quickly masked her panic with defiance. "You were being disrespectful," she claimed, her voice shaky but resolute. "First class has certain standards." Alex's gaze held hers for a long moment. The silence between them said more than words could. Then, as if on cue, Alex's phone vibrated in his pocket. He retrieved it and glanced at the screen, reading a message that would change the trajectory of this flight and Lana's life forever. The sting of the slap lingered on Alex's cheek as he returned his phone to his pocket. The message he had just read confirmed that the acquisition of the airline had been finalized. Alex Carter was now officially the owner of this company and, by extension, Lana's boss. But Alex chose not to reveal this detail just yet. He believed in handling challenges with tact and strategy rather than impulsiveness. The incident with Lana wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a larger issue. He saw this moment as an opportunity to make meaningful change, not just for himself, but for countless others who might face similar discrimination. Lana, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the monumental mistake she had made. She hurriedly resumed her duties, her hands slightly trembling as she served drinks to other passengers. Alex watched her carefully, noticing how she avoided eye contact with him and delegated tasks in his section to other flight attendants whenever possible. Her once commanding presence was now tinged with unease. The plane began its taxi down the runway, and Alex leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes briefly to gather his thoughts. He wasn't a man who sought vengeance for its own sake, but he knew that what had transpired couldn't be ignored. With steady fingers, he took out his phone and composed a concise message to the CEO of the airline, a man who was, unbeknownst to Lana, about to report directly to him. The email outlined the incident, detailing Lana's actions with professionalism and clarity. Alex requested an immediate internal investigation into her conduct, emphasizing the importance of addressing systemic issues within the company's culture. Once the message was sent, Alex tucked his phone away, determined to let his actions, not his emotions, dictate the course of the coming days. As the flight progressed, Alex observed Lana's interactions with other passengers. The patterns were unmistakable. She treated certain passengers, those who appeared affluent or fit her perception of what a first-class traveler should look like, with exceptional courtesy. Others, particularly those who didn't conform to her biases, received perfunctory service or were ignored altogether. One moment, in particular, caught Alex's attention. An elderly black woman in the row ahead of him struggled to lift her carry-on bag into the overhead compartment. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and her hands trembled slightly as she looked around for assistance. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, addressing Lana, who was arranging items on her service cart nearby. "Could I get some help, please?" Lana glanced up briefly, her expression indifferent. "One moment," she said, her tone clipped before turning her attention back to the cart. A few rows ahead, a white man raised his hand. "Miss, could I get another pillow?" he asked. Lana's demeanor shifted instantly. Her lips curved into a warm smile, and she hurried over. "Of course, sir," she chirped. "I'll get that for you right away." Alex's jaw tightened as he watched the exchange. The elderly woman continued to struggle with her bag until Alex stood up. "May I help you with that, ma'am?" he asked gently, stepping forward. The woman's face lit up with gratitude. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said. "These old bones aren't as strong as they used to be." Alex lifted the bag effortlessly and placed it in the compartment. As he returned to his seat, he noticed Lana glancing at him from the corner of her eye. Her expression was a complicated mix of embarrassment, irritation, and perhaps a hint of guilt. Alex didn't react, choosing instead to make a mental note of the interaction. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Alex took out his tablet and began reviewing information about the airline. His search revealed a troubling pattern. Over the years, numerous passengers have filed complaints alleging discriminatory treatment from staff members. Many of these complaints had been dismissed or received only a token response. Even more alarming, several of the reports specifically mentioned Lana by name. Alex's eyes narrowed as he read through the complaints. They described incidents eerily similar to what he had just witnessed. Passengers of color being ignored, elderly travelers left without assistance, and in some cases, outright hostility. One report stood out. A young mother traveling with her biracial child wrote about being subjected to Lana's cold remarks and dismissive behavior. "I felt humiliated," the mother had written. "My child asked me why the flight attendant didn't like us. How do you explain that to a 5-year-old? Alex's heart sank as he imagined the pain and confusion that mother must have felt. He knew that this was bigger than Lana's individual actions. It was a cultural problem that had been allowed to fester within the airline. Determined to address it head-on, Alex began drafting ideas for comprehensive reforms. These included mandatory training programs on diversity and inclusion, a revamped process for handling complaints, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. The hours passed slowly, and by the time the plane began its descent, Alex's vision for the airline was taking shape. He envisioned an organization where all passengers felt valued and respected, regardless of their background. But he also knew that achieving this goal would require more than just policies. It would require a cultural shift from the ground up. As the plane touched down, Alex remained seated, allowing other passengers to disembark first. Lana avoided his gaze as she assisted others with their belongings, her movements mechanical and her demeanor subdued. When it was finally Alex's turn to leave, he nodded politely to the crew, including Lana, who barely acknowledged him. Walking through the jet bridge, Alex took out his phone once more and sent a final message to his team. Begin the process. Discretion is key. In the days that followed, Alex's acquisition of the airline remained a closely guarded secret. Behind the scenes, however, his team began working tirelessly to lay the groundwork for change. Internal investigations into employee conduct, including Lana's, were launched quietly but thoroughly. At the same time, Alex reviewed drafts of new policies and training programs, offering his input on how to create a more inclusive and respectful environment. Meanwhile, Lana continued her daily routine, unaware of the storm brewing around her. She arrived at work each day with her usual confidence, exchanging pleasantries with her colleagues, and assuming that the incident on the flight had been forgotten. However, whispers about an investigation began circulating among the staff, and Lana noticed subtle changes in how her coworkers interacted with her. Conversations would abruptly stop when she entered the room, and people who once greeted her warmly now avoided her gaze. One afternoon, Lana's supervisor, Mark, called her into his office. "Lana," he began, his tone measured, "we've received some concerns about your conduct on recent flights." Lana's defenses went up immediately. "Concerns?" she repeated, feigning confusion. "I've always maintained the highest standards in first class." Mark's expression remained neutral. "This isn't about standards," he said firmly. "It's about how you treat people." Lana left Mark's office with her heart pounding, a mix of disbelief and indignation swirling in her chest. The word investigation lingered in her mind, heavy and foreboding. She had always taken pride in her work, priding herself on maintaining what she believed were the standards of first-class service. To now be accused of inappropriate conduct felt like an affront to everything she thought she stood for. As the days passed, Lana began to notice subtle but undeniable changes. Her regular flying partners were suddenly reassigned, leaving her to work with unfamiliar crews who watched her every move. Conversations among her colleagues seemed to hush as she approached, their furtive glances only fueling her growing paranoia. On one occasion, while checking a passenger manifest for her next flight, she overheard two flight attendants speaking in hushed tones. Did you hear about Lana? One whispered. Yeah, something about discrimination, the other replied. Lana's breath hitched as her stomach churned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this what people thought of her? Worse? Was there truth to it? That evening, Lana sat alone in her apartment, replaying the events of the past few weeks. She thought about the passengers she had served over the years and her interactions with them. While she wanted to believe that she had always been fair and professional, a nagging doubt began to creep in. Had she, perhaps unknowingly, treated some passengers differently? And if so, why? Her thoughts returned to the elderly woman on the flight. Lana had dismissed her request for help while rushing to assist another passenger who fit her subconscious image of a first-class traveler. The memory unsettled her. She had never considered herself biased, but now she wondered if her actions told a different story. The following morning, Lana received an email that made her blood run cold. Mandatory cultural sensitivity training, attendance required. She stared at the message, her pulse quickening. The idea of being forced to sit through what she assumed would be a lecture on political correctness filled her with dread and irritation. She had been a flight attendant for over a decade, and she didn't need anyone telling her how to do her job. When Lana arrived at the training center a few days later, her frustration was evident. The room was arranged with circular tables, each surrounded by chairs. Other flight attendants, some familiar and others not, chatted quietly as they settled in. Lana chose a seat near the back, crossing her arms and avoiding eye contact. She didn't want to be there, and her body language made it abundantly clear. The session began with Meena Patel, a cheerful and charismatic trainer, stepping to the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone," Meena said warmly. "Today, we're going to explore how empathy and cultural awareness can improve not only our interactions with passengers, but also our work environment." Lana rolled her eyes subtly, convinced the session would be a waste of time. As Meena spoke, Lana doodled absent-mindedly on her notepad, her mind wandering to the tasks she could have been accomplishing instead. When Meena invited participants to share experiences of cultural misunderstandings, Lana remained silent, letting others speak while she kept her eyes fixed on the clock. "Lana," Meena said gently, breaking through her thoughts, "would you like to share your perspective?" Startled, Lana looked up. "I don't really have anything to add," she replied flatly. "I've always done my job just fine." Meena nodded, her smile unwavering. "There's always room for growth and learning, don't you think?" Lana shrugged, returning to her doodles. She failed to notice the concerned glances exchanged between Meena and her assistant, who discreetly operated a camera recording the session. The group transitioned to role-playing exercises designed to help participants recognize and address unconscious biases. When it was Lana's turn to demonstrate how she would handle a non-English-speaking passenger, her response was curt. "I just speak louder and slower," she said with a sigh. "That usually works." Meena gently suggested alternative approaches, but Lana waved them off. "Look, we can't bend over backward for every single person," she said, her tone tinged with impatience. "Sometimes they just need to adapt to our way of doing things." The room fell silent. Other participants exchanged uneasy glances while Meena's cheerful expression faltered slightly. Despite the tension, Lana remained oblivious to the impact of her words, dismissing the session as unnecessary and overly sensitive. As the day progressed, Meena presented stories from passengers who had experienced discrimination while flying. The stories were raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of how small actions could leave lasting scars. Lana listened half-heartedly at first, but soon found herself unable to ignore the weight of the stories. Each account felt uncomfortably familiar, echoing interactions she had brushed off as insignificant. One story, in particular, struck a nerve. A young mother recounted being ignored by a flight attendant while traveling with her mixed-race child. "I felt invisible," the mother had said. "It made me question what kind of world my child would grow up in." Lana felt her chest tighten. Could her own actions have made passengers feel the same way? She didn't want to admit it, but a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Yes." The session concluded with Meena asking each participant to share one takeaway. When it was Lana's turn, she hesitated. "I guess we're supposed to walk on eggshells now," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Wouldn't want to offend anyone while doing our jobs." The room's atmosphere grew tense, but Mina, ever composed, thanked Lana for her honesty. "I hope you'll reflect on today's session and find more positive takeaways," Mina said, her tone measured but firm. Lana left the training center feeling more frustrated than enlightened. As she drove home, however, fragments of the stories she had heard replayed in her mind. She began to question not just the training but herself. Was she as fair and professional as she believed, or had she been blind to her own biases? The following week, Lana's unease deepened. She received another email informing her that her training sessions would be closely monitored and evaluated as part of an ongoing review of her conduct. The pressure weighed on her, and for the first time in years, Lana doubted her abilities as a flight attendant. During a breakroom conversation with her friend and fellow attendant, Rachel, Lana vented her frustrations. "Can you believe this sensitivity training nonsense?" Lana fumed, waving the crumpled notice in her hand. "I don't need someone lecturing me about how to do my job." Rachel hesitated, her expression cautious. "Maybe it's not such a bad thing, Lana," she said gently. "Sometimes we all need to take a step back and look at how we treat people." Lana stared at her friend, incredulous. "Are you saying I've been doing something wrong?" "No, that's not what I mean," Rachel said quickly. "I just think, well, times are changing. Maybe the airline wants to make sure we're all on the same page." Lana scoffed. "I don't need to be on any page. I know how to do my job, and I do it well." She stormed out of the break room, her mind racing with defiant thoughts. But beneath her anger lay a growing unease she couldn't ignore. The seeds of self-reflection had been planted, and though she hadn't realized it yet, Lana was on the brink of a transformation that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself. The following week, Lana's world seemed to close in further. At every turn, whispers and sidelong glances from her colleagues reminded her that she was under scrutiny. Though no one openly confronted her, the tension was palpable. For the first time in her career, Lana felt truly isolated. Then, an email arrived that sent her spiraling. "Upcoming live session. Your training progress will be streamed to the entire company." Lana stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The thought of standing in front of a camera, addressing her peers, supervisors, and even corporate executives, made her stomach churn. She scrolled through the message again, hoping she had misunderstood, but the details were clear. This wasn't just another training exercise. It was her opportunity, or perhaps punishment, to publicly address her behavior. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't do this." For days, Lana wrestled with her emotions. At first, her anger flared. How could they single her out like this? She was a professional, someone who had worked tirelessly for over a decade. But beneath her indignation lay an uncomfortable truth she couldn't escape. Her actions had brought her here. The night before the live session, Lana sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled notes and unfinished drafts of what she would say. Her usual confidence had eroded, leaving behind a gnawing anxiety. She had tried writing statements filled with justifications and excuses, but each attempt felt hollow. Nothing could erase the memory of that slap, nor the countless moments she had dismissed passengers based on her biases. Lana's mind drifted to the stories she had heard during training. She remembered the elderly woman struggling with her bag, the young mother's heartbreak, and the countless other passengers who had shared similar experiences. For the first time, Lana began to truly grasp the weight of her actions, not just the immediate harm, but the deeper impact they had on people's sense of worth and dignity. With a shaky breath, Lana picked up her pen again. This time, she decided to stop hiding behind excuses. She would write the truth, no matter how painful it was to admit. The morning of the session arrived, and Lana dressed with meticulous care. Her uniform was pristine, her hair neatly styled, but her reflection in the mirror revealed a woman on the edge of breaking. As she made her way to the training center, her heart raced with every step. The room was abuzz with activity as technicians adjusted cameras and microphones. A producer greeted Lana with a clipped smile, guiding her to a spot marked with tape on the floor. "Just look at the main camera," the producer instructed. "And remember, the whole company will be watching. No pressure." Lana nodded numbly, unable to muster a response. She stood in the center of the room, the bright lights casting long shadows around her. When the red light on the camera blinked on, signaling that the stream was live, Lana felt a wave of panic wash over her. She took a deep breath, clasped her trembling hands, and began. "Good morning," Lana said, her voice quivering slightly. "My name is Lana Blake, and I'm here to talk about a serious mistake I made." The room was silent, save for the hum of the camera equipment. Somewhere in offices and break rooms across the airline, hundreds of employees were watching, their attention fixed on the woman who had become the focal point of the company's push for change. Lana continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "A few weeks ago, on one of my flights, I acted in a way that was not only unprofessional, but deeply hurtful. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I treated a passenger unfairly based on their appearance." She paused, her throat tightening as she remembered Alex's calm but piercing question. "Why did you slap me?" I made assumptions," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I believed I was upholding the standards of first class, but in reality I was enforcing my own narrow view of who belonged. I see now how wrong I was." Lana took a moment to collect herself, the silence in the room almost deafening. "It's not easy to admit this," she said, "but I grew up in a place where these attitudes were normalized. That doesn't excuse my actions, it only explains where they came from, and I want to make it clear, I'm ashamed of what I did." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and for that I am deeply sorry." As Lana spoke, her words carried across the company's live stream, reaching employees of all ranks. Some listened with skepticism, their arms crossed as they watched. Others nodded in quiet acknowledgement, recognizing the courage it took to confront such deeply ingrained biases. Just as Lana began to feel the weight lifting from her shoulders, a commotion erupted off-camera. A producer rushed forward, whispering urgently to the session's director. Lana faltered mid-sentence, glancing toward the activity. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. The director signaled for her to continue, but the tension in the room was palpable. Despite her best efforts to focus, Lana couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. When the camera finally blinked off, signaling the end of the session, chaos broke loose. Lana overheard snippets of hurried conversations. Breaking news, airline criticized, PR stunt. Her heart sank as she pieced together what was happening. A major news outlet had just published a scathing article accusing the airline's cultural sensitivity initiatives of being performative. The piece, which was already going viral, questioned the authenticity of the training programs and implied that the company was more concerned with saving face than creating real change. Lana felt a wave of despair crash over her. Just as she had begun to believe in the possibility of redemption, this public backlash threatened to overshadow her efforts. Elsewhere, Alex Carter sat in his office, fielding call after call from anxious board members and shareholders. The negative press was a serious blow to the airline's reputation and threatened to undo months of hard work. But Alex remained composed, his mind already working on a plan to counter the criticism. "We can't let this derail us," Alex said firmly during a conference call with his leadership team. "This isn't just about optics, it's about proving that our efforts are genuine and effective. We need to double down on transparency and show our employees, passengers, and the public that we're committed to real change." After hanging up, Alex leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he refused to let this setback diminish his resolve. Change was never easy, and backlash was inevitable. What mattered now was how they responded. For Lana, the session had been both a reckoning and a turning point. While the backlash stung, it also served as a reminder that meaningful change required more than words. As she left the training center that day, she resolved to prove, through her actions, that she was capable of growth. The ripple effects of the live stream session were immediate and far-reaching. Across the airline, employees debated Lana Blake's apology, her sincerity, and what her story represented. Some dismissed it as damage control, a move orchestrated by leadership to shield the company from criticism. Others saw it as a rare glimpse into the vulnerability of someone willing to confront their flaws. Meanwhile, Alex Carter was hard at work addressing the backlash. He decided that the best way to combat skepticism was to amplify the voices of those who had been affected. If the airline was to prove its commitment to change, the people it served needed to be front and center. Within a week, Alex organized a company-wide forum where passengers could share their experiences directly with employees, from flight attendants to executives. The event was held in a sprawling conference room, with a live stream available for all airline staff to watch remotely. The room buzzed with anticipation as employees filed in, taking seats in neat rows. Lana chose a spot near the back, her nerves frayed, but her curiosity was piqued. Alex began the forum with a calm but firm address. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice steady. "Today, we're going to listen. The stories you'll hear may be uncomfortable, but they are necessary. I ask that you open your hearts and minds as we reflect on how we can do better, not just as an airline, but as individuals." The first speaker was a young Muslim woman, her voice trembling as she recounted an experience that left her feeling humiliated. "I was asked to switch seats because another passenger said they felt uncomfortable sitting next to me," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "The flight attendant didn't even hesitate. She just moved me as though I was the problem." A Latino man stepped up next, describing the indignity of being repeatedly questioned about the legitimacy of his first-class ticket. "It's exhausting," he said, his tone weary but resolute. "Every time I fly, I have to prove that I belong, as if my skin color automatically disqualifies me." Lana sat frozen in her chair, the weight of each story pressing down on her. She could feel the collective pain and frustration of these passengers, their voices resonating with the incidents she had dismissed as trivial. The room was heavy with unspoken apologies, and staff members exchanged glances filled with guilt and reflection. Then, an elderly black woman approached the microphone. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her glasses, but her voice carried a quiet strength. "I remember asking for help with my bag," she began, her tone steady. "The flight attendant looked right through me as if I didn't exist. But when a white passenger asked for help just moments later, she smiled." Lana's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the story. It was the same woman from the flight where Alex had intervened. Her chest tightened as the memory resurfaced, vivid and raw. She hadn't just ignored the woman, she had actively chosen to prioritize someone else, reinforcing a message that the woman didn't matter. "It might seem small to some," the woman continued, her voice faltering slightly, "but it hurt. It made me feel invisible, like I didn't belong." Tears welled up in Lana's eyes, blurring her vision. She could no longer deny the truth of what she had done. Each story peeled back another layer of her defenses, leaving her exposed to the harsh reality of her actions. As the forum continued, more passengers stepped forward, each story adding to the mosaic of voices demanding change. By the end, the room was steeped in a profound silence, the kind that follows the shattering of long-held illusions. Alex returned to the stage, his expression somber but determined. "Thank you to everyone who shared their experiences today," he said. "Your courage is not only appreciated but essential. These stories remind us of the real impact our actions or inactions can have." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "This isn't about assigning blame or pointing fingers. It's about taking responsibility and committing to do better. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we move forward." The audience erupted into a subdued round of applause, the sound carrying a mix of hope and heaviness. Just as Alex was about to close the session, a voice broke through the stillness. "I'd like to speak," Lana said, standing from her seat. All eyes turned toward her as she made her way to the front of the room, her steps hesitant but resolute. Taking the microphone, Lana glanced nervously at the crowd before locking eyes with Alex, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and began. "My name is Lana Blake," she said, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. "And I'm here to admit that I've been part of the problem." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "I grew up in a small town where everyone looked like me," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "We didn't talk about diversity or inclusion. We just existed in our bubble, unaware of how narrow our perspectives were. When I became a flight attendant, I brought those biases with me, even though I didn't realize it at the time. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Listening to these stories today, I see now how my actions, whether intentional or not, have hurt people. I've treated passengers differently based on how they looked. I've ignored some and favored others. And for that, I am deeply ashamed. Lana's voice cracked as she pushed through her emotions. But being ashamed isn't enough. I need to change. We all do. It's not easy to confront beliefs we've held our entire lives, but it's necessary. She turned to face the passengers who had shared their stories, her eyes glistening with tears. To those I've hurt, I'm sorry. I can't undo what I've done, but I promise to do better, to be better. The room remained silent for a moment before a small wave of applause began, growing louder as more people joined in. Some employees nodded in agreement, while others looked skeptical, their arms crossed and brows furrowed. Lana knew that not everyone was ready to forgive or believe in her sincerity, but she was determined to prove through her actions that she could change. After the forum ended, Alex approached Lana as the crowd began to disperse. "Lana," he said, his tone gentle but serious, "could I speak with you privately?" She nodded, her heart racing as she followed him to a quiet corner of the room. Alex took a deep breath, his expression softening as he met her gaze. "Do you remember the passenger you had an altercation with on that flight?" he asked. Lana's stomach dropped. Of course, she remembered. It was the moment that had set all of this in motion. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That passenger," Alex said, his voice calm but firm, "was me." Lana stared at Alex, her face drained of color. "That passenger was me." Her legs felt unsteady, and she gripped the edge of a nearby table to keep from swaying. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I'm soaked." Tears pooled in her eyes as she recalled every humiliating word she had spoken to him, every dismissive glance, and finally the slap that had echoed through the cabin. She covered her mouth with her hand as if trying to hold back the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Alex studied her reaction quietly. He saw not just the shame and regret etched on her face, but also a glimmer of something deeper, the dawning realization of how her actions had shaped this moment. "Lana," he said gently, "that day I was angry. Angry at how I was treated, angry at the assumptions you made about me. But instead of reacting in the heat of the moment, I saw an opportunity." Lana frowned, confusion flickering across her features. "An opportunity?" "Yes," Alex said, his tone steady but firm. "An opportunity to address not just your actions, but the culture that allows these biases to thrive. What happened on that flight wasn't just about you or me. It was a symptom of a larger problem, one that needs to be fixed." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "That's why I didn't retaliate that day. Instead, I decided to focus on change, not just for myself, but for the entire company." Lana wiped her eyes, her cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. She had expected anger or retribution from Alex, but she did not understand. You could have fired me on the spot," she said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Alex smiled faintly. "Because firing you wouldn't have solved anything. It might have felt satisfying in the short term, but it wouldn't have addressed the underlying issues. I wanted to give you a chance, not just to learn from this experience, but to become part of the solution." Lana looked down, her mind racing. She had spent the past weeks consumed by anger, fear, and defensiveness. But now, faced with Alex's unexpected compassion, she felt a new emotion take root: hope. "What do I do now?" she asked hesitantly, meeting his gaze. Alex's expression softened. "First, keep learning. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it requires effort and humility. Second." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have a proposition for you." Lana's brow furrowed in surprise. "A proposition?" Alex nodded. "I'd like to offer you a leadership role in our new cultural sensitivity initiative. You've experienced firsthand how biases can affect our actions. Now I want you to use that experience to help others grow." Lana blinked, her shock evident. Of all the possible outcomes she had envisioned, this was the last thing she'd expected. You want me to lead?" "To help lead," Alex clarified. "This isn't a reward, it's an opportunity. A chance to make amends by using what you've learned to create meaningful change within the company." For a long moment, Lana was silent. The weight of Alex's offer pressed heavily on her. It wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility, one that would require her to confront her past actions and use them as a foundation for growth. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one ever is," Alex replied with a small smile, "but I believe in your ability to rise to the challenge. The question is, do you?" Lana took a deep breath, the gravity of the moment settling over her. I want to try," she said finally. "I want to make things right, not just for you, but for everyone I've wronged." Alex nodded approvingly. "That's all I ask." The next day, Lana reported to her new role at the airline's training center. The atmosphere was tense as she entered a room filled with trainers and colleagues, many of whom had heard about her infamous incident. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to outright hostile, and Lana could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. Alex stood at the front of the room, introducing her to the team. "Everyone, this is Lana Blake," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She'll be working with us to develop new cultural sensitivity workshops." The room fell silent, and Lana felt a dozen pairs of eyes boring into her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I know some of you are wondering why I'm here," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "The truth is, I made mistakes. Big ones. But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because I want to help fix the problems I've been a part of." The room remained quiet, the tension thick. But Lana pressed on. "I know I have a long way to go, and I don't expect anyone to trust me right away. All I can do is prove through my actions that I'm committed to change. Not just for myself, but for all of us." As the weeks passed, Lana threw herself into her new role with determination. She spent long hours researching best practices for diversity and inclusion training, collaborating with trainers to create workshops that were both impactful and practical. Her personal story became a central component of the sessions, serving as a powerful example of how biases could manifest and the harm they could cause. At first, Lana felt vulnerable sharing her past mistakes, but she quickly realized that her honesty resonated with others. During one session, a young trainee raised her hand. "Hearing your story, it makes me think about my own biases," she said. "I didn't even realize I had them until now." Lana smiled, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and humility. "That's the first step," she said gently. "Acknowledging our biases is the only way we can begin to overcome them." Still, not everyone was quick to accept Lana's transformation. Marcus, a senior trainer who had been vocal about his doubts, confronted her during a meeting. "How do we know this isn't just a PR stunt?" he asked, his tone sharp. "How do we know you've really changed?" Lana met his gaze steadily. "I can't prove my sincerity with words alone," she replied. "All I can do is show you through my actions, and I'm committed to doing just that." Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding slightly, his expression softening. "We'll see," he said simply. By the end of the month, Lana's efforts began to bear fruit. The workshops she helped develop received positive feedback from employees, and her colleagues slowly started to warm to her. Alex, who kept a close eye on her progress, felt a growing sense of pride in her transformation. "You're doing great work," he told her one afternoon after a particularly successful session. "Thank you," Lana said, her voice filled with gratitude. "This opportunity has changed my life. I just hope I'm making a difference." Alex smiled. "You are. And you're proving to everyone that change is possible." Months passed, and the ripple effects of Alex Carter's reforms began to permeate every level of the airline. Employees across departments, from flight attendants to executives, underwent new, rigorous cultural sensitivity training. The anonymous feedback app Alex had implemented began collecting valuable insights, giving passengers a voice and holding staff accountable in real time. Lana Blake's transformation was one of the most talked-about stories within the company. Her willingness to confront her own biases and share her journey openly had a profound impact, inspiring others to reflect on their own actions. But the road wasn't without its bumps. Skepticism still lingered among some employees, and Lana often found herself under intense scrutiny. One such moment occurred during a high-profile training session Lana co-led with Marcus, the senior trainer who had initially doubted her. The session included employees from diverse roles, flight attendants, gate agents, and even pilots, gathered to discuss real-world scenarios of unconscious bias. Today, we're going to dive into situations where our assumptions can lead to unequal treatment, Lana began, her voice confident but calm. She introduced a role-playing exercise where participants acted out challenging passenger interactions. When one of the scenarios mirrored the elderly black woman Lana had ignored on Alex's flight, the room grew tense. The passenger asked for help with her bag, and the attendant hesitated before eventually responding. The subtle pause, the mere moment of uncertainty, was enough to spark a discussion about how seemingly minor delays could send powerful messages about value and respect. It's not just about what we do, Lana explained. It's about how we do it. People notice when they're treated differently, even if we don't realize we're doing it. Marcus, observing from the sidelines, stepped forward. Lana's right, he said, addressing the group. And I'll admit, I was skeptical of her when she first took on this role, but watching her grow and own her mistakes has changed my perspective. It's proof that anyone can learn and evolve if they're willing. Lana felt a swell of emotion at Marcus's words. His acknowledgement marked a turning point, not just for her but for the entire team. The changes extended beyond the company's internal culture. Passengers began to notice the difference, leaving glowing reviews about the newfound inclusivity and respect they experienced while flying. Stories of exceptional customer service spread on social media, painting the airline in a new, positive light. Alex Carter watched these developments with quiet pride. One afternoon, as he reviewed a stack of feedback reports in his office, his assistant entered with a tablet. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing it to him. The headline on the screen read, "An airline's remarkable turnaround, setting a new industry standard for inclusivity." Alex skimmed the article, his heart swelling as he read about the company's efforts being recognized not just by passengers but by industry experts. The piece highlighted the anonymous feedback system, the revamped training programs, and the measurable improvements in customer satisfaction. It even mentioned Lana's journey as a powerful example of personal and organizational growth. "She's really made an impact," Alex murmured, setting the tablet down. Meanwhile, Lana was busy leading yet another workshop, this time for a group of newly hired flight attendants. The diverse mix of trainees listened intently as Lana shared her story, her voice imbued with the wisdom gained from months of reflection and effort. "I used to think that as long as I followed the rules, I was doing my job," Lana admitted. "But what I've learned is that our actions go beyond rules. They leave impressions, sometimes lasting ones, on the people we interact with." She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "I'm not proud of the person I was, but I'm proud of the person I'm becoming. And my hope is that by sharing my story, I can help all of you avoid the mistakes I made." One trainee raised her hand. "It's inspiring to see how much you've changed," she said. "It makes me feel like there's always room for growth, no matter where we start." Lana smiled warmly. "There is," she said. "And that's what I want you all to take away from this. We're not just here to enforce policies. We're here to make every passenger feel valued and respected. That's the true heart of this job." Later that evening, Alex called Lana into his office. She entered, still in her uniform, and took a seat across from him. "You've done an incredible job, Lana," Alex began, his tone warm. "The feedback from the workshops has been overwhelmingly positive. People are noticing the difference you're making." Lana felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "But honestly, I couldn't have done it without this opportunity. It's changed me in ways I never expected." Alex leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Do you know why I gave you this chance?" he asked. Lana hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Because you believed I could change?" "Yes," Alex said with a nod. "But also because I saw potential in you. Not just the potential to grow, but to lead. And you've proven me right." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "This is just the beginning, Lana. There's still so much work to be done. But I'm confident that with people like you driving these changes, we're on the right path." As the weeks turned into months, the airline continued to build on its momentum. The cultural transformation wasn't just a surface-level change. It was ingrained in the company's DNA. Employees felt empowered to speak up, passengers felt valued, and the airline became a model for inclusivity in the industry. For Lana, the journey was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow and make a difference. The skepticism she had once faced gradually gave way to respect and admiration from her colleagues. Even those who had been most critical of her began seeking her advice and support. One evening, as Lana packed up her materials after a workshop, she noticed Marcus waiting by the door. "You did a great job today," he said, his tone genuine. "Thank you," Lana replied, smiling. "That means a lot coming from you." Marcus nodded, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "You've proven that people can change, and honestly, it's made me reflect on some things I need to work on myself." Lana felt a lump form in her throat. "That's all I ever hoped for," she said softly. As Lana walked to her car that evening, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She knew the work she was doing wasn't just about improving an airline. It was about changing lives, one interaction at a time. The culmination of months of effort and transformation led to a major milestone for Alex Carter's airline, a company-wide summit to celebrate its progress and outline the next steps toward becoming a global leader in inclusivity and respect. The event was held in a grand convention hall, with employees from all levels of the company in attendance. A lively buzz filled the air as people exchanged stories about how the changes had impacted their work and lives. Lana Blake stood backstage, clutching a notepad filled with her speech's key points. The invitation to speak at the summit had filled her with equal parts pride and anxiety. Her journey from disgraced flight attendant to a central figure in the airline's cultural overhaul had been deeply personal, but now she would be sharing it with thousands of her colleagues. Alex approached her, his usual calm demeanor offering a sense of reassurance. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Nervous," Lana admitted, managing a small smile. "But ready." Alex nodded. "You've earned this moment, Lana. Just speak from the heart." As Alex took the stage to deliver his opening remarks, Lana listened intently, his words resonating deeply. "When we began this journey," he said, addressing the packed hall, "it wasn't about repairing a reputation or chasing profits. It was about doing what was right for our passengers, for our employees, and for the future of this airline." He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. This transformation wouldn't have been possible without the courage and dedication of so many people here today. And now, I'd like to introduce someone whose story embodies the very essence of what we've been working toward. Lana Blake. The audience erupted into applause as Lana stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before beginning. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice echoing across the vast hall. "Standing here today is something I never imagined would happen, not because of where I started, but because of where I went wrong." The room grew silent as Lana recounted her story. From the day she dismissed Alex Carter as a first-class passenger to the long journey of self-reflection and growth that followed. She spoke candidly about her biases, her mistakes, and the profound impact of the passengers' stories she had heard during the forums. "One thing I've learned," Lana said, her voice steady, "is that change begins with acknowledgement. It's not easy to confront our flaws, but it's necessary if we want to grow. I've had to unlearn habits and assumptions I didn't even realize I carried, and that process has been humbling." She paused, scanning the crowd. "But I'm not here today to tell you that I've fixed myself or that the work is done. Because it's not. Change isn't a destination. It's a journey, and it's one I'll be on for the rest of my life." The audience remained riveted as Lana continued, her sincerity shining through every word. "What I hope to share with you is that it's never too late to change. Whether you're a flight attendant, a passenger, or the CEO of an airline, we all have the power to learn, to grow, and to make a difference." She ended her speech with a simple yet powerful message. Treat every interaction as an opportunity to show respect and kindness. You never know whose life you might touch or how they might touch yours. The applause that followed was thunderous. As Lana stepped down from the stage, several employees approached her, expressing their gratitude and admiration. One young attendant, her eyes shining with tears, said, "Your story gives me hope. It makes me believe that real change is possible." Lana smiled warmly, the words filling her with a sense of purpose she had never known before. "It is possible," she replied. but it takes all of us. As the summit concluded, Alex gathered his senior leadership team for a final debriefing. They discussed the measurable impacts of their initiatives: a significant reduction in passenger complaints, increased employee satisfaction, and glowing media coverage that painted the airline as a leader in cultural transformation. "I'm proud of what we've accomplished," Alex said, his voice filled with conviction. "But this is only the beginning. We have to stay vigilant, to continue holding ourselves accountable and striving for better." The team nodded in agreement, their collective commitment evident. For Lana, the journey didn't end with the summit. She returned to her role as a leader in the airline's training programs, dedicating herself to mentoring new employees and refining the workshops. She also began reaching out to passengers who had filed complaints, seeking their insights on how the airline could improve. One day, while reviewing a stack of feedback forms, she came across a familiar name: the elderly black woman from Alex's flight. Lana immediately reached out, inviting her to a private meeting. The woman accepted, and they sat down together in a quiet conference room. "I wanted to thank you," Lana said, her voice earnest. "Not just for sharing your story, but for helping me see what I couldn't see before. You were right to call out my behavior, and I want you to know that I've worked hard to change." The woman studied Lana for a moment before nodding. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong," she said. "And it takes even more courage to do something about it. I'm glad to see you've chosen the right path." The meeting ended with a handshake that felt like a symbolic closure to one chapter of Lana's journey and the beginning of another. Months later, Alex and Lana stood side by side at an awards ceremony where the airline was recognized for its outstanding efforts in promoting diversity and inclusion. As they accepted the plaque together, Alex turned to Lana with a smile. "Do you remember what I told you when this all began?" he asked. Lana nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "That change doesn't happen overnight, but it's worth fighting for. And look at how far we've come," Alex said, his voice filled with pride. "This isn't just about an airline, it's about the lives we've touched along the way." Lana looked out at the audience, a sea of faces filled with hope and determination. She knew that the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt confident in the path ahead. Together, Alex and Lana had proven that second chances weren't just about redemption. They were about creating a ripple effect of positive change that could transform not just individuals but entire communities. The story of Alex Carter and Lana Blake is more than just a tale of conflict and redemption. It's a testament to the transformative power of second chances, compassion, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. It reminds us that no one is beyond growth, and even our most flawed moments can become the foundation for meaningful change if we're willing to learn from them. For Alex, the journey was about turning anger into action and using his position of influence to inspire systemic transformation. His decision to see Lana not as an adversary, but as a potential ally, underscores an important lesson. Real change begins when we address the roots of a problem, not just its symptoms. For Lana, the story is one of self-discovery and accountability. Her willingness to face her biases, acknowledge her mistakes, and work tirelessly to become part of the solution shows us that humility and perseverance can lead to profound personal growth. At its heart, this story challenges us to think about our own biases and the ways we interact with others. It's a call to treat every person we meet with respect and empathy, regardless of how they look or where they come from. After all, every interaction is an opportunity to uplift someone and ourselves in the process. Bookmark. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Press 1 if you found the story inspiring, or press 2 if you found it truly unforgettable. And while you're here, why not share a story from your own life or a moment that taught you a valuable lesson? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more inspiring stories like this one. Each tale we share is crafted to touch your heart, spark reflection, and remind us all of the incredible power of change. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for more.